AMD's Radeon RX 500 series refresh was a quick blitz of mostly recycled GPUs and iterative nomenclature. But there were a couple of developments that made the 500 series notably more competitive than the Radeon RX 400s before them. For instance, we got a first taste of Polaris 12, codenamed Lexa, in our Radeon RX 552GB review. That GPU was designed to fill a gap under $100 where entry-level favorites like Radeon R7 260 and 360 once lived. It, along with Nvidia's competing GeForce GT 1030, were welcome additions to a long-neglected segment. Just above the RX 550 in its refreshed product stack, AMD unveiled a Radeon RX 560 that also piqued our interest. Last year, we identified the Radeon RX 460 as a clear step up from previous skin-on Air-based cards and Nvidia's GeForce GTX 750T. Radeon RX 560 takes the same Polaris 11 GPU, enables all of its shading texturing resources, increases its clock rate, and theoretically lowers its price. If the RX 460 was already a strong option for HD gaming, we couldn't wait to see how Radeon RX 560 improved upon it. Meet Radeon RX 560 more shaders, higher clocks. When Radeon RX 460 launched more than a year ago, we hadn't seen a new mainstream GPU from AMD in years. Until then, everything was repackaged first and second generation GCN designs. Naturally, though, the shift to 14nm FinFET inherently meant new processors, even if they shared a lot of architectural attributes with their predecessors. Now the company is massaging its first wave of Polaris GPUs to better situate them against a full portfolio of Pascal-based competition, compared to Polaris 10, composed of 5.7 billion transistors on a 232 square millimeters die. Radeon RX 560's processor packs 3 billion transistors into 123 square millimeters of die space. It's similarly based on AMD's 4th-gen GCN architecture, but rebalanced for more power-sensitive applications. A single graphics command processor up front is still responsible for dispatching graphics queues to the shader engines. So too are the asynchronous compute engines tasked with handling compute queues. As with Polaris 10, this chip's command processing logic consists of 4 ACEs, with 2 hardware scheduler units in place for prioritized queues, temporal spatial resource management, and offloading CPU kernel mode driver scheduling tasks. While many resources are trimmed moving from Polaris 10 to 11, this is not one of them. Shader engines, on the other hand, are halved. Polaris 11 gets 2, compared to Polaris 10's 4. But whereas the version of Polaris 11 that went into Radeon RX 460 featured 7 active computer units per shay, Radeon RX 560 gets a completely uncut GPU sporting 16 total CUs. Given 64 stream processors and 4 texture units per CU, the math for Radeon RX 560 adds up to 1024 shaders and 64 texture units across the GPU, a approximately 14% increase. AMD Radeon RX 560 Asus ROG Strix RX 560 04GB Gaming NVIDIA GeForce GTX 1050 NVIDIA GeForce GTX 1050 TIG Polaris 11 BAF and Polarize 11 Baffing 107 GP207 shaders 10,241,024,640,768 base clock frequency 1175 MHz 1221 MHz 1354 MHz 1290 MHz boost clock frequency 1275 MHz 1326 MHz 1455 MHz 1392 MHz memory size type 4GB GDDR5 4GB GDDR5 2GB GDDR5 4GB GDDR5 process technology 14 nanometers 14 nanometers 14 nanometers 14 nm transistors 3 billion 3.3 billion 3.3 billion texture units 64,644,048 texture fill rate 81.6 GTs 84.9 GTs 58.2 GTs 66.8 GTS ROPS 16,163,232 pixel fill rate 20.4 GPIX is 21.2 GPIX is 46.6 GPIX is 44.5 GPIX memory bus 128-bit 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 memory clock frequency 3500 MHz 3500 MHz 3504 MHz 3504 MHz memory bandwidth 112 GB 112 GB 112.1 GB 112.1 GB STDP80W80W100W75W120W2 render backends per shader engine, each with 4 ROPs, total 16 pixels per clock, or, again, half of what you get from Radeon RX 580570. Polaris 11's memory bus is also cut in half to 128 bits. AMD tries to compensate somewhat with 7 GB SGDDR5, but even then, you're only looking at 112 GB of bandwidth. This spec is unchanged from the Radeon RX 460. There are higher GPU clock rates to talk about, though. AMD specifies a base frequency of 1175 MHz and a boost ceiling of 1275 MHz. The company sent our US and German labs Asus ROG Strix Radeon RX 560 04GB Gaming OC Edition to test, which is overclocked to a 1326 MHz boost frequency in gaming mode. Interestingly, while the Radeon RX 460 was officially rated under 75W, opening the door to implementations without auxiliary power, all of the boards we tested had 6-pin connectors. For its higher clocked Radeon RX 560, AMD cites a typical board power of 80W. And yet, we've already seen versions with no power connector and higher than reference clock rates. Our Asus cards do, however, come equipped with 6-pin inputs. More best graphics cards, more desktop GPU performance hierarchy table, more all graphics content. Page 2 specifications. Asus uses the same matte graphite shroud that we've seen on its previous models. It's not particularly conservative, but it doesn't jump out at you either. A backlit logo is perhaps the most eye-catching highlight, and you're able to control its color output via software. There are also a couple of stickers in Asus bundle for adding flair, if you feel like tacking them on. There's no backplate, which we find a little surprising given this particular card's price tag. Expect to pay $150, whereas the least expensive Radeon RX 560s sell for $130. A 6-pin power connector is found on the card's top edge, all the way at its back. The thermal solution's cooling fins are oriented vertically, meaning waste heat is directed down toward your motherboard and out to the side of your case. Fortunately, Polaris 11 isn't a particularly hot GPU. Display outputs include one DP 1.4 connector, an HDMI 2.0 interface, and one DVI port, all three of which can be used simultaneously. DVI is fine, though it's really falling out of vogue. We imagine it makes the most sense on an entry-level graphics card like this one that might go into a lower-end machine without a brand new monitor. Board and power supply. Asus uses a custom PCB sporting 41 power phases. Its design looks a little unconventional from the front and back. Case in point, the memory's VRM is over there on top right, below the 6-pin power connector. On the back and behind AMD's GPU, you'll find a number of surfacey mount components that generate a significant thermal hotspot in our infrared images. The BIOS is in the same vicinity, and it heats up quite a bit as well. PWM controller Digiep Realtek USP1206 VRM M3056 MUBIC high side 1x per phase M3054 MUBIC low side 2x per phase and channel MOSFET Scoil SUP Super Alloy Power Ferrite Core Chokes Memory Modulus 5GC8H24MJRROCSK Hynix 4x8 GB Module 7GB SPWM controller UP 1540 UPI Semiconductor Synchronous Rectified Buck Converter Single Phase VIM 3056 MUBIC high side M3054 MUBIC low side and channel MOSFET Scoil SUP Super Alloy Power Ferrite Core Chokes Fan Controller 8915 Fernita Fan Control Monitoring BIOS Winbond 25x20 Kinect Semiconductor EEPROM BIOS Additional features 1x 6-pin auxiliary power connector regulated fan connection for case fan more best graphics cards more desktop GPU performance hierarchy table more all graphics content